So hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast, a show where we talk all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula 1, and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending of course on which platform you choose to follow us on. And guys, in case you can't tell, I am a very happy man right now. We've just had the first race of the season in Bahrain, and in case you are watching this on YouTube and wondering why I'm wearing a Ferrari top instead of the old DNF1 shirt, I think it's quite obvious for anyone who saw the race. It was a Ferrari 1-2, Charles Leclerc winning the first race of the season, and after so long, 2 years I would say, of investment and time and anguish amongst the Ferrari fan base, hoping that the direction that they would take the team to go down to produce a 2022 car that could be capable of winning Grand Prix and winning World Championships. Well, if today is anything to go by, they have taken a very positive first step, and I, for one, try to keep my biases in check where I can, but I think for those of you that would have watched the watch-along yesterday, and by the way, thank you for everybody that tuned into that. It was a lot of fun doing it, and I hope to do plenty more qualifying watch-alongs soon, so I hope you enjoyed it as well. But I really hope that there could be many more days for the Scuderia. But that being said, we've also got to talk about some of the great stories from the first Grand Prix of the season, and there were plenty of them. So to review this incredible Bahrain Grand Prix weekend with me, I've got my co-host with me again, Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. Fellas, thanks for joining us once again. Courtney, I'm going to come to you first of all. I mean, you can sum up the euphoria on my face and how happy I am about what went down today, but how can you sum up the opening weekend of Formula One's brand new era? Was it a success?
It was a great start. I know, obviously, as a Ferrari fan, you're jubilant, but I'm also feeling jubilant as an F1 fan in general. I think this first race is a win for F1 in general. I think there's been obviously a lot of talk about these new regulations having a desired effect, particularly when it comes to overtaking. And you know what, Bahrain does usually deliver with overtakes, but even more so, it looks like we're going into an era now that isn't reliant on DRS zones and battery harvesting. I think we're going to have some great racing. Obviously, we're going to go through during a review some of the moments that we had. And if this race is anything to go by, F1 fans have so much to look forward to after a disappointing end to 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we can talk briefly about the FIA report that was produced over the weekend that obviously I mentioned during the qualifying stream. And I didn't have much time to read it, but I was able to sort of skim through and pick out some of the key points that I noticed on that, which of course we can talk about a little bit later on. But Lee, bringing you into this discussion as well, as I've already mentioned, and as Courtney said, it's been a great opening weekend for Formula One in this brand new era of racing, which hopefully will produce many weekends like this one and plenty of action on the track, positive stuff to talk about all the way round. But you can sometimes be forgiven for thinking that when a team turns up to the first race of the season and everyone expects them after testing to be the team to beat, and then they go out and deliver what was a 1-2 finish in spectacular fashion, you can be forgiven for thinking that this is not necessarily a good thing, because we want to see close racing, we want to see competitive racing, we don't want to see one team run away with it. Can you probably sum up how what we've seen today, despite the result that we got, we couldn't be anything further away from a dominant outfit running away with this championship?
Well, firstly, I do want to agree with Courtney's sentiment. It was such an enjoyable race, up and down the field, overtaking and action galore, which is what obviously Formula One went out to do when it designed the current cars, or the regulations for the cars. They obviously didn't do the cars themselves; that was the teams. But yeah, it can be perceived, obviously, oh no, it's 1-2, same again. It's all right, it's not Mercedes, but it's, let's say, another team's going to go and dominate. But I just want to remind everyone listening, obviously, it's the first race of a very long season, of a new set of regulations. The development curve is going to be tremendous. We saw throughout the race there was close racing, and to the fact that teams were bunched, or cars were bunched together for most of the race. You look at even to last year, in a few laps you were spread out, and you have a nice 1-2 second gap until the first pit stops, and they'll open up to that 10-second gap. For the majority of the race, they were spread out, apart from, unfortunately, the Mercedes powered cars at the back of the grid. But it's no way any means that we're going to be looking at a period of domination at the moment.
Yeah, and I certainly hope not. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm ecstatic at the result today, and I really, really hope that this is a sign of things to come for Ferrari. As I said, I do try to keep my biases in check, so I do apologise if you're not a Ferrari fan and wondering why I'm going on and on and on about Ferrari. It's just been such a great day for the Scuderia. I mean, we'll start with them first on this topic, as you guys have both raised a lot of good points already to sort of welcome in F1's brand new era of racing, which hopefully will produce more great weekends like this one, regardless of who wins. Of course, we want to see great racing all the way through, and there were so many stories that we're going to need to unpick. It's not often that we have many stories to talk about in an F1 race. We do tend to sometimes try to make lemonade from turnips, for a lack of a better metaphor to use in this regard. But, we've got plenty to talk about, so we're going to get into it. And firstly, I think there's no better place to start than with Ferrari. Their first win since Singapore 2019. Incidentally, they're also their first 1-2 finish since that time as well. And Courtney, before we got on the podcast, you brilliantly reminded me that this is the first time since we've started this podcast that we are going to be talking about a Ferrari win. So, I mean, I'm going to come to you first on this one, as enjoyable as that was to hear when you told me that. What did you make of Ferrari today? Did they live up to the expectation? Did they deliver on the hype?
Once more, just like to say that I called this 2 years ago. I just knew it was so important for Ferrari to get these regulation changes right. And with the management changes they've made, a couple of years ago, that the culture of that team has been turned around, and I think they're starting to get the results. So, well done to Ferrari for all the hard work they've done. At the end of the day, you want to be seeing as many teams up there competing as possible. So having Ferrari back where they should be is only good for the sport. And it's another reason why F1 fans have a lot to look forward to. I've always been impressed with the driver pairing that they had. I think with a pairing in Leclerc and Sainz, even if they don't have the best car, they have two drivers that can get good results. As I said, not even on their best day, these are the type of drivers that you want to be driving for a team like Ferrari. If they really want to be challenging for both championships, I really do believe there's a lot to look forward to this season.
Yeah, I think so too. And I certainly hope that you're right, obviously, as a Ferrari fan and a big fan of F1 for many years. I think what was really, really good to see today from Ferrari is that we've seen in the past, over the last 20, 25 years, sometimes when Ferrari aren't in the championship hunt and they do come out with a good car, most notably in the turbo hybrid era, I think is probably more accurate to say, that having a good car is not always enough. You need to have the strategy right. The drivers need to be driving on top form. The pit stops need to be perfect. They need to react to situations in the right manner as and when they occur in Formula One, which we saw today. And for lack of a better way of putting it, as much as I'm, loving to brag about it, I can't think of one moment in that race at all where Ferrari or their drivers put a foot wrong at all. They absolutely managed that race perfectly. And in particular, Charles Leclerc was phenomenal. And I know that you guys both, rightly so, have had the occasional doubt over whether or not Leclerc could sustain the level or drive at the level of a Verstappen or a Hamilton, although we all agree that he could be in that ballpark at one point. Based on what we saw from him today, does that help to perhaps give some assurance that with the right machinery, which apparently he does seem to have now, and in the right conditions, Charles Leclerc can raise his game to that level on a consistent basis and potentially become a challenger to Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton on a regular basis?
Lee?
I was going to, thank you, Courtney, say that it was obviously a brilliant display of driving from Charles and Sergio, driving under constant pressure throughout via Max. And obviously, as you said, Courtney and myself have our doubts about Charles and moments, and I'm not going to deny that I probably prefer Carlos over Charles. But it's one thing from actually having a great race and bringing the win, but doing it over a season, doing it on the championship, doing it the pressure of especially a close championship like essentially last year, for example. If Charles can deliver that, it's too early to say. But from one race in the first of the season, he did brilliantly. The way he obviously described the the intelligent overtaking one. He was overtaken by Max, and then he was like, "No, I'm going to brake early so I can tight line so I can get and he get him back, and he twice, and I was like, yeah, that's really intelligent driving from him. Obviously, you guessed at the time, but he actually said that after the race. So yeah, I'm really impressed with his driving today.
Yeah, very much so. And I think you're absolutely right, Lee. I mean, it's very easy for people like myself and other Ferrari fans in that camp to get carried away by everything seems to go perfect for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc by extension of that.
Adam, could I just add on, actually?
Yeah, sure.
I think the most intriguing thing that could come from this, obviously, Ferrari becoming better, is that there's a lot of history between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. Let's not forget this. You know, there's a high-profile karting incident where they clashed, for example. I think Charles Leclerc is probably the most suited into battling Max Verstappen compared to any other driver on that grid, because he's raced against him for such a long time. We saw the moment where Charles sort of like backed, not aggressively, but firm, to stop Max Verstappen doing what Max Verstappen usually does. I do believe if people think that Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen was fiery, honestly, if these two guys are battling for a championship, it's going to be an absolute classic.
Yeah, I must agree with you massively there, because when he pulled that move off, and I think it was the second time that was it the second time that Max got past him at turn 1 and then Charles got ahead of him at turn 4? Yeah, he did. Just before braking, he pulled across just to cover him off because he knew that Max would try for a lunge down the inside. And we know Max is more than capable of pulling that move off, surprising everyone. He did the same thing to Lewis Hamilton at Abu Dhabi at the beginning of the race. He pulled, he dove down the inside, went for that lunge, and Lewis didn't see it coming, but Charles knew it was coming, covered it off early, and force Max to get on the brakes. Absolutely right. And it's a very, very bold statement, but one I think has a lot of merit to it in how Charles probably knows how to deal with Max. And he's had plenty of experience of being on the other end where Max has caught him out. And, Austria a couple of years ago when he got him on the last lap, Silverstone as well when he got Leclerc there. Leclerc's always been one of those guys, I think often when he battles Max, people have said he needs to get the shoulders out a bit more. He can't let Max bully him. And I think what we saw today was a prime example that Charles in this machinery, he's not going to be bullied around, or at least so it seems early on. But as I said, Lee was saying earlier, it's a really great point because it's very easy to get carried away by everything going really, really well. And we know in a Formula One season, no matter how dominant you are, there's always going to be days where things will be a bit more difficult. And I think that's where we're going to see a real test of Ferrari, test their metals to see if they really are the real deal this season. I certainly hope that they are. What really impressed me the most for the racing aspect was a couple of things. Firstly, obviously, after the start of the race, everything seemed to go swimmingly for Leclerc. He was handling the pressure for Max really well, and the two of them broke away from the likes of Sainz, Perez, and of course the two Mercedes drivers who, we'll get on to in a moment. But it was a period where Red Bull pitted Max, and I think it was about 3.5 seconds behind Charles Leclerc. It was incredible how powerful the undercut was, that when Leclerc had a bit of a so-so stop, it was about 3 seconds, but about 2 tenths slower than what Max had for Red Bull. As soon as he comes out, Max is right behind him and all over the back of him. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, how powerful is this undercut? And I think as I was messaging you guys in the group chat, Lee's already beat me to it. And I just thought, that is really something I think a lot of the teams are going to have to keep an eye on throughout the course of this season, is how powerful the undercut could be in this new era of racing. We knew it was worth about a second or two normally, but that much of it's a good thing for Ferrari pitted him when they did. And I think the other thing that really surprised me was how rapid the Red Bull is in a straight line. Like really, really rapid. And I think it was the third incident where Max made the mistake into turn 1. He locked the brakes, and that allowed Charles to get back past him. And then, of course, Charles was able to keep the position. And then, obviously, after that, the two of them never really locked horns after that. Leclerc seemed to have that one covered after that pivotal moment in the race. I just couldn't, and I think it was just under a second. I think it was like 9.5 tenths, which is almost the whole gap allotted for DRS. And we feared that DRS might not be as powerful in this new era because of the fact there's going to be less wind resistance, because most of the turbulent air is going to be thrown up and there'll be less of a slipstream. But wow, that Red Bull is fast. And that could be a huge weapon for Max Verstappen in the way that it was for Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes last season, where towards the back end of it. But just
I
moving
do want
on.
to add on. Sorry, another thing Ferrari did well in the race. Before you move on, was their pit stops.
Yes.
I don't know which one was I don't know what was the fastest pit stop through the entire race.
I think it was Sainz got 2.3 from what we could see.
All the other teams were consistently 3 seconds something.
Yeah.
Ferrari were 2 something, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, and that's a lot of time. Half a second even is a lot of time to lose in a pit stop, especially when we've got used to low 2 seconds, or obviously before the rule change last year, that sub 2 second pit stop. So Ferrari have really worked on their pit stops a lot. Well, the other teams obviously aren't practicing, but they didn't pull off the kind of speeds that Ferrari were doing on their pit stops. So you have to take your hat off to Ferrari on the operational side of the team and the pit stop. And obviously the tyres are heavier, so obviously there's more effort to actually swap the wheels. So it's just hats off to Ferrari on that as well. I just wanted to add that in before you moved on.
No, that's a really, really good point that you've made, because I think that second stop that Charles Leclerc had, where I think the undercut threat was pending with Max Verstappen when they were changing onto the mediums, there was a fear that if they didn't get that stop right, Max was going to be on Leclerc like he was before, or maybe worse, ahead of him. And it was about 2.5 seconds, I believe it was. It was a much faster stop than what Red Bull had done. I think it was about half a second quicker than what Red Bull did with Max. And Red Bull are known as usually the pit stop kings. So for Ferrari to do that as well, ultimately played a huge part for them winning this race as well. But as much as we can praise and congratulate Ferrari and be really happy for what they've done, and we really are. It's me especially. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm trying to contain Mike Simon. I'm sorry. I try to be as professional as possible, but this is a really, really great day for me. It's been a long time coming. But, all that being said, I do want to talk about Carlos Sainz as well before we get on to Red Bull and Mercedes in particular. Carlos Sainz himself, it was a great day for him too. P2, it was a solid drive. I thought he himself felt he was a bit off the pace. He was struggling a little bit. He wasn't as happy with his performance, but ultimately coming second in Ferrari 1-2 for him is still a great day for him. Would you agree with that statement from Carlos Sainz? Do you feel that he was perhaps a bit lacking, or do you think that he perhaps underestimated how good his teammate was in that car?
I think you can probably say there's a bit of both. We've always said, as much as we've praised Carlos last season, I still think he can compete with Charles. But I do feel that Charles has that star ability in those big moments. Like if it was to go into a championship battle, if I was Ferrari, I'd rather have Charles Leclerc in the championship battle than Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz is a great team player, very, very talented driver. But I do feel that Charles Leclerc in the championship battle, he will be the element that Ferrari needs in order to win a championship. But I do feel that it will be a close battle between the two. It's just those big moments where Charles has that extra drop of talent to make the difference.
Yeah, and it could prove to be what allowed Charles to stay ahead of Max Verstappen in that pivotal moment of the race where they were dicing, as impressive as it was. I do think it's also a testament to clean racing. I know there was plenty of overtaking and battles going on throughout the circuit, but of course this was the highlight of the race when those two were coming together. And that as aggressive as it was between the two, there did seem to be a bit of a matter of respect between the two on circuit. Something that usually when we watch Max Verstappen dice in with championship rivals, we don't often always see. Sometimes he does go a little bit too much. Sometimes it can go the other way against him, where his opponent might go a bit too much on that one. But that's just how it goes sometimes. That's racing for you. But I think it's a really, really good sign to see that these cars can follow each other relatively well. One thing I did want to note, that it did seem that the Red Bull might struggle, or it does seem that it does struggle sometimes when it is following to sort of keep the temperatures in check. I think that's something we saw with Perez. Verstappen was told about that as well briefly. Is that something that we may see some of the other cars have to deal with, or perhaps it's something that's just specific to Red Bull?
It's interesting you say that, because when Mercedes had an exceptionally fast car, they struggled to follow cars behind them. So Red Bull might be in a position this season where they're going to have to qualify well in order to get race wins. Generally speaking, we know a lot can happen in Formula One races to change results, but in terms of raw pace, think you might have a good point there, Adam. I do feel that Max Verstappen might have to get a few pole positions easily done, but he might have to get pole position on a standard race day in order to win a race.
Yeah. And he was very desperate to get past Leclerc in that period. It's normally sometimes you think, I suppose Max is probably not too familiar with this sort of situation where he tries to go about it in a methodical approach where he knows he'll get him at some point. It's just a case of when is the right time to do it, not necessarily do it at the earliest convenience. Something that I think we can all agree Sir Lewis Hamilton is brilliant at doing. He knows he's going to get his opponent. It's just a case of when is the right time for him to do it. Lee, I want to move the conversation over to Red Bull. A very disappointing day for them. I think it was a weekend that they themselves, I think after testing, especially that moment, I know you mentioned how they were all sort of high-fiving each other in the garage and Dr. Helmut Marko was sort of smiling at the upgrades that they bought. Did seem to be the clearest indication we got from anybody that Red Bull knew that they probably had the best car or the best package going into the first Grand Prix. Taking the retirement part aside, which we'll talk about in a moment, because obviously that was a big deal, do you think that they will look back on this race knowing that they were not just slower than the lead Ferrari, but Perez was also struggling to overtake Carlos Sainz, and whether he would have done at the end of the race, we don't know. It didn't seem likely at the time. Do you think that they'll be worried going into future races that perhaps they're not as far ahead as we all expected them to be?
I don't think they'll be worried just yet, but I think they were definitely surprised. Because up until yesterday, the Red Bull looked by not by a large margin, but looked the fastest car. And then we had qualifying, and then Ferrari turned up, and then Ferrari managed to maintain that throughout the race. Or obviously, regardless, not withholding, obviously they're not finishing, but the Ferrari were ahead respectively of the respective Red Bulls. So it's too early for them to say they're worried. Would be worried about that, but I think they were surprised that they weren't the fastest car this weekend when all the signs were pointing to them as being the best package, as you said. So yeah, I think they'll definitely have to see how the next weekend's race goes, especially if they do have a potential issue with their engine and therefore a potential issue with heat, because obviously Saudi Arabia is still very hot. It's very close to Bahrain geographically and climate-wise. So, and obviously they're not going to potentially fix any problems within a week. So, I would definitely say they're going to be watching that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I was at Red Bull before those retirements and I was looking at their performance purely on pace, yeah, granted, they could probably hold their hands up and say, you know what, Ferrari did a better job than we did in all areas today. But there were elements of that car that did look incredibly impressive, most notably the straight line speed, which I think we saw last season, that can be so critical. And Max, with all due respect to Hamilton and what he did last season, that straight line speed was a huge asset to his comeback, and he utilised that brilliantly, as often as he does when he has those opportunities. And now Max seems to have that weapon in his arsenal. And Sergio Perez, I suppose, as well. We need to add that in as well. So I think Red Bull would be relatively happy looking at the performance and say, okay, Ferrari beat us today, but there are going to be other days where we're going to get them, or we'll be able to do a better job with our package than they will. It's just the first race of 22 at the moment. We've got a long season ahead of us. But looking at the bigger picture here, is there a real concern at Red Bull now after the way that their race ended for not just both their cars, but also Pierre Gasly in the Alpha Tauri, we should mention, that triggered the safety car originally, and then obviously the cluster of issues that they had, also potentially with a similar problem, although it might have been a bit more of a explosive one because of the way that the rear of his car was on fire. Is there a fear that there could be some issues with this power units altogether that could cause more problems for not only Red Bull but the rest of the Honda powered cars in an era now where these engine regulations are frozen up until 2026?
We've seen this with some of the best cars in Formula One history, particularly in the modern era, that sometimes these cars are so tightly packaged for performance gains that it can sometimes have an effect on reliability. It could possibly be the case for Red Bull, but the fact there was problems with Alpha Tauri as well. that suggests that possibly, maybe with this new engine, they wanted to make a statement. They wanted to be aggressive. But again, sometimes if you that desire for performance can sometimes harm reliability. We look at Mercedes, for example. They've always had the best or thereabouts engine. Knowing that, having that confidence in their own ability, that gave them the ability to focus more on reliability. And you can have all the speed in the world, but if you're going to have issues like that, particularly when the pack is as close as it is compared to usual, you're going to find yourself dropping a hell of a lot of points. It could just be teething issues, like first race of the season of a brand new era. I think we need to congratulate all the teams involved actually for, apart from the odd incident here or there, a very clean race, barely any retirements. That's really good work by most of the teams on the grid. So it's just to remind that despite the teams going well, this is a new era. So there are going to be teething issues with some teams. But I do feel that Red Bull should be concerned because right now you've got Ferrari. They're going to be up there. And I think Red Bull was slightly guilty of thinking about Mercedes too much. This is just my opinion, no one else's. I do feel that Red Bull have developed an unhealthy obsession with Mercedes. And I think sometimes they're too focused on what Mercedes are doing rather than what they're doing. And I don't know. If they're so obsessed with Mercedes, I personally believe it's only a matter of time before Mercedes catch up. And in their minds, they're going to be like, damn, this was an opportunity to get one over Mercedes. And Lewis Hamilton still got a podium. So of course Red Bull can come back from this. But they will be concerned, no doubt.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a lot of leftovers from what happened last season between Red Bull and Mercedes. Not necessarily just Abu Dhabi, but the whole thing in general. Especially the way that Mercedes in particular celebrated a third and fourth. Now, we're talking about a team that's had unprecedented dominance in this sport for the last 8 years or so. The only blip in that, obviously inadvertently unfair on them to have this, was obviously Max Verstappen winning the championship last year. But I'll be honest with you, I think the happiest person on that podium was Lewis Hamilton. I think he was happier than both the Ferrari guys, like the way he wanted to lift Charles Leclerc on his shoulders, and Charles was like, no, settle down, I'm just going to enjoy this one. I think Lewis was more excited to be there than two Ferrari drivers, but fair play to him. But it is a very, very good point, Courtney, and I'm glad you mentioned this because I was thinking this too, that in the midst of Ferrari doing what they're doing, you can be forgiven for thinking that Red Bull would be more disappointed about the fact that not the fact that they were beaten handsomely by Ferrari today before the reliability issues that they suffered, but the fact that they dropped points to Mercedes at a Grand Prix weekend where Mercedes were absolutely nowhere near Red Bull. Couldn't think of a time when Mercedes were more off the pace against Red Bull on merit rather than just at a track-specific occasion than they have been since 2013. And as we often say, when Mercedes have a bad weekend, you absolutely have to take advantage of that. And because of what's happened, Red Bull have not done that. And I think you're right. I think they're more annoyed about that than the fact that they, with healthy cars, they were still beaten by Ferrari. Or at least both their cars were beaten by at least one of them. So that is a concern. And I think Red Bull, with all due respect to them, I don't think they all sitting around in the debriefing room with Mercedes, Hamilton and Toto Wolff laughing at them living rent-free in their heads or anything like that, or maybe one or two of them might be, I don't know, I'm not going to name names here. I'll leave that one up to you guys and our wonderful guests that tune into this show to figure that one out. But all that said, all jokes aside, I do think that it could be a problem for Red Bull if they're more worried about Mercedes and dropping points to them, because as you said, Courtney, there will come a time when Mercedes will catch up. They will be in this championship fight, and I sincerely hope that it will be soon, although not too soon, because I want to enjoy more days like this for Ferrari. I just want it to be on an equal playing field. I'd love to see, I said this to you guys in the WhatsApp chat earlier, that I would love to see Sir Lewis in this fight with Max and Charles. It's got Schumacher, Alonso and Kimi vibes from 2003. It really does, and that was a great season. And if you guys can't remember that season because unfortunately you were too young or you weren't following Formula 1 at the time, I definitely recommend you guys go back and check that out. It was an incredible season with 3 of the all-time greats in the sport all at the same time. It was absolutely fun to watch, and I'd love to see that again with Lewis, Max and Charles. I really think we all would want to see that. So hopefully that happens soon, and Mercedes can give Lewis the tools to get him in that fight. But, back to Red Bull briefly before we move on to Mercedes. There was a lot of frustration from Max Verstappen. Not necessarily because of these issues, although ultimately that was a problem, but there was a phase in the race, the second pit stop, where he claims he was told on the radio by Red Bull to ease yourself into this stint. Don't use up all the grip on your tyres, because I think that's something that Lewis Hamilton was doing, and it caused him to go from a potential one stop to end up doing a 3 stop because he was just burning up his tyres too soon. And you could argue that Max was possibly doing that in the battle with Charles Leclerc anyway, which caused him to drop off as the stint went on. Max was saying that he felt that if he was allowed to go at the pace that he wanted to when he had the fresh tyres on, he'd have not only got ahead of Charles in the second stint, he'd have also got ahead of Charles after the first stop. So, guys, when you hear that, do you think there's any truth in that, or do you feel that it was just one of those that Max Verstappen was just frustrated about a lot of things today, and, he felt, because we saw last year that when he was battling away with Lewis and he made the overtake at turn 4 and he had to give the place back, or he was going to get a 5-second penalty, he went on the radio and said that he felt he could have built up a 5-second gap and won the race still, but Red Bull told him to let him go. Is there a potential risk that as the season goes on, we might have more days like this where Max may fall out with his own team because they're giving him advice that kind of contradicts what he wants to do and ultimately may cost him races?
I would have said for that, Max doesn't like being told to go slowly. He's all about pure pace and performance. And that's what he chases and desires from himself. We've seen it multiple times over the Mercedes dominance of Lewis, get your tyres, better tyres. Oh, the tyres are gone, Bono. But Lewis is still driving within the tyres and he wins the race or he gets the podium. Max, I don't think that's a skill set Max has as of yet, of driving within the tyres, driving to a predefined speed to win the race. Max just wants to go flat out to win the race, which that's not always the best strategy. I don't think what he said, he would have been ahead of Charles if he got the performance he wanted. I think Ferrari were just the fast car. Even if he had got ahead, Charles would have got ahead of him again as the tyres dropped off. Ferrari just had the better pace today. So I think regardless, it's just a moot point. And he was just frustrated that he thought he'd be on pole. He thought he would go and win this race based on Friday, and that's not happened.
Yeah, it's a good point. This isn't me trying to drive a wedge between Max Verstappen and Red Bull, but I think what's important to note is that throughout this turbo hybrid era, one thing that I think has been a hallmark to Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton's success as a partnership is that as great as Lewis Hamilton is and as innovative as he can be when he's driving, to think outside the box and put himself in a position where he's able to deliver on so many occasions when it seems like their backs are against the wall. I think one thing that's been a hallmark to all of that is the trust in both parties between Lewis and Bono, and by extension the rest of the team too. Even in situations where Lewis doesn't trust what the team's doing, they ask him to stick to it, do what you can do, you'll be in that position to win the race later on. And how many times over this turbo hybrid era has Lewis Hamilton done that? He's trusted in his team completely, and they trust him to deliver. It seems ambitious, but they know he can pull it off, and he's done it so many times over and over again. There's a real trust there that you only see only a few times in Formula One history. Schumacher and Ferrari had it. Vettel and Red Bull had it with Rocco and Vettel. They had that partnership, and it worked brilliantly for them, and Mercedes and Lewis had it. I can't honestly say that I feel that Max and Red Bull have had that enough of a synergy together to say that they're doing that too. I still feel sometimes that Max does trust in the team, but all feels in the back of his mind that it's to his detriment, and then it gets a bit frustrating, and then sometimes it's almost like blame culture is coming out there. As I said, I'm not trying to drive a wedge in it. I'm not trying to say that the two are going to fall out, but I sometimes feel that there could potentially be a risk that if we have more days like that this season where Max feels that the team might be holding him back a little bit from being able to win the race by himself, there could be a scenario where Max might decide to do something that might go against the team's best wishes on the track, and it may detriment his own race. I'm trying to think of an example of where... a good example. You know Silverstone a couple of years ago, was it 70th anniversary race? They told him to hang back from the Mercedes, and he said, look, this is as close to what we've been to the Mercedes in ages. I'm not going to drive around like an old grandma. And he stuck with them against the team's wishes, and he ended up winning that race. So sometimes I feel like there might be a scenario where Max might think, well, you know what, actually, I know what's best for me. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And Max, as you said, Lee, doesn't like to be told to go slow. So I'm wondering if there is at this point, will there come a time where Max and Red Bull will be on the same page and be able to do what the likes of Lewis and Mercedes have done, and as I said, Michael and Ferrari and Seb and Red Bull? Courtney, do you feel that there is a fear that the two of them aren't still on the same page despite all that success?
Do you know what? Either way, it will come out if there's a tight championship battle. You know, it's very easy to cover up any sort of fractions or wounds in the team if everything's going well. It's the moment you're in a high pressure environment that the cracks begin to appear. And one race in, you never know. With a season that could be close, you could have a two-team battle, potentially 3, maybe 4, who knows. You need to be on point with everything. And obviously with that comes a lot of pressure on the team to deliver. Max is the main protagonist at Red Bull. He's the main guy. He's the world champion, expected to be a multiple world champion. And with that comes an element of pressure on Max as well. So, and obviously he's the following that he has in his own country is phenomenal. And again, with that does come pressure. So there's going to be a lot of, it's a conflict of interest, isn't it? As working as a team and also thinking about yourself as an individual. And again, I don't feel we're going to really see the answer to that question until we get to at least mid-season. If we have what we think is going to happen, have a three-way battle, that's when we're really going to see it kick off either way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can extend that to say that it's not necessarily just Max and Red Bull where this is an issue. I mean, we saw last season, the Russian Grand Prix, Lando Norris and McLaren were sort of 6s and 7s with each other over what they should do with the impending weather, and there wasn't cohesion there in terms of the what they should have done, and they lost the race, unfortunately. And then there was Lewis and Mercedes that did agree, and Lewis trusted in his team, and that won him the race. So it's one of those paradoxes in Formula One sometimes that whilst this is a team sport, the individual, the driver, can sometimes prove to be the difference. And ultimately, you're going to get occasions like that where it could be for you or against you. And on a day like today, as frustrating as it was, Max felt that he could have won this race, you know, without the reliability issues, obviously. If the team hadn't held him back, it would have been interesting to see how that would have went down if Max had finished second today. You know, what his thoughts would have been, because I'm pretty sure he probably would have felt that, you know, I could have won this race today, but the chance I had, I was held back, you know, when I could have done it. But it's very easy to say that, you know, from this sort of position where we are right now. Speaking on the reliability issues, just before we move on, Sergio Perez, very, very unlucky not to get on that podium after inheriting that from his teammates' issue. He was very, very distraught. What did you make of Perez this day? Because I think overall, Perez drove very, very well. You know, ultimately, he wasn't able to get ahead of Sainz, but he was a lot closer to his teammate, and he was in that fight. And that's something that I think we're going to need Perez to do a lot this season for him to secure that seat at Red Bull beyond 2022. Lee, what did you think of Perez this day?
I think he drove brilliantly. He drove a lot better. Well, not that he actually drives or anything, but he was better because he was closer to Max in grid position and even in lap times. Obviously, Max was still the faster driver at the Red Bull pair. But I think the key thing for Sergio is this year he's had some input into the car design, and the car is not completely configured around Max, which is the problem. One of the things that I reckon Alex has struggled and Pierre struggled in the past was the car was so much developed around Max and Max's ability. Where this is a brand new car, they haven't had the time to refine it to Max. So Sergio's being able to extract more works for him, which is able to unlock some performance in himself. But yeah, I really feel sorry for Sergio. I think he's a very likable driver and a great personality. It's just, it was just sore to watch him afterwards, and it's like, Sergio, man. When can he have a break?
Yeah, he was visibly distraught after that race. You almost wanted to go out there and give him a hug. Like he and I think he knew it. I think he knew that he'd come quite a long way from where he was last season. And I really hope this is a sign of things to come from Perez. Even if it was P4 today and he was beaten by Sainz, I think he'd have known. He was only about, 10 seconds off his teammate before all that happened in the safety car. And that, so he was genuinely there or thereabouts where Red Bull kind of need him to be. So for what it's worth, I think Perez was very, very good today. It was just very unfortunate, as was Verstappen and Pierre Gasly. And of course, Red Bull feel it's the same issue that's plagued the both of them. So hopefully it'll be one for their sake that was very easy to fix, although it was very strange that they happen very, very close to each other. It's crazy how that sort of thing can happen in Formula One, where one car is plagued by an issue, suddenly the other one has the same problem. I think Mercedes, it was Austria in 2019. Something very, very similar happened to them, which took them both out. But on the subject of Mercedes, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, third and fourth place. So Lewis getting the podium and George Russell fourth. His best ever finish in Formula One, if you don't include the Spa result. Overall, there's a lot of positives and negatives to take from Mercedes. It was very much a learning experience, I think Toto Wolff described it as for them. Even though they weren't really in the game to try and win this race, they seemed to be quite some distance off Red Bull and Ferrari. For the most part, when the opportunities came, Mercedes was still there, nipping at their heels, maybe more at Sergio Perez's heels than anyone else, but they were there or thereabouts. So, and they got a podium and a good result, and obviously some big points against Red Bull on a day where they really struggled and they took advantage of it. As a Mercedes fan, as Mercedes fans, guys, obviously I know we try to be impartial on this podcast, but I think, you come from a camp where we can actually have a invested interest in this.
Mm-hmm.
How satisfied are you with today's performance from Mercedes? Forget the result, because that's obviously a very big plus, but how satisfied are you with the performance? Are there signs there that you feel that Mercedes aren't as far away from those leading two teams as it was first feared before qualifying?
I think to start off with is something else I was saying to you guys whilst the race was going on. If Mercedes were genuinely behind this season, and let's say they weren't able to catch up, I couldn't really complain, because the team where my favourite driver has driven for has had the best car for the last almost a decade now. We've had it good, we've eaten well, so I couldn't complain. If Mercedes were to have a bad season. It's been a great era for Mercedes fans. So if they have a one bad season, so be it. I just think I know there'll be some people who will be upset if Lewis doesn't have the best car, but if you love F1 as a sport, you're going to be happy regardless of who won today. But I don't want to go too far off with the whole Mercedes Lewis thing. Another thing I'd like to raise, that another good thing that has kind of come from Mercedes' situation so far is actually a couple of the stigmas that are suggested about Lewis Hamilton, I feel, have been silenced today. I think the first one is the whole thing, Lewis only performs well in the best car. He drove it exceptionally well once more in a car that had no right to be anywhere near where it was. That's one of the things I noticed. And it's also the attitude about Lewis Hamilton. He was genuinely happy to get that podium. He was speaking well with his team throughout the practice sessions. He knew they were behind, and he was always motivating the team to improve. He's always thinking about moving forwards. And that's something that a lot of people say, Lewis Hamilton, he has a bad attitude. He cries when he doesn't win. And I do. I just feel that I feel a few of the Lewis Hamilton haters have been silenced today, no doubt.
Yeah. I must say, I think Lewis drove a very, very good race today, and it's a solid result. As I said, I think Perez was very unfortunate not to get the podium, but I must say, I think Lewis drove a really, really good race, and it just shows the current atmosphere within the team on where they currently feel that they stand, and they're obviously very well aware of the work that they're going to have to put in to get themselves back in this fight with the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull, considering the deficit between the two. And it's early days, so there's plenty of time for them to recoup that deficit. But they seemed absolutely delighted and thrilled with a P3. It was almost kind of reminiscent of in a way, when McLaren won at Monza or when Ferrari were getting podiums and that, when they knew that they were behind, it's very weird to associate that with Mercedes, but they certainly took it for what it was worth. But they very much acknowledged that, despite the fortune that they had today, and they drove very well under the circumstances to recover the best result possible. They were very well aware of the fact, I think it was Toto Wolff mentioned it, that they were potentially 35, almost 40 seconds off the lead car in race trim, and they had to make an extra stop as well because of the tyre degradation issues that both Russell and Hamilton had, resulting in a free stop strategy for both of them. But it did seem that, hopefully for their sake, they'll be able to bring some new parts to this car and bring that car to where I think F1 feels it needs to be. We don't want to see... the thing is, as much as people get bored of dominance from one team, we don't want to see a leading team struggling to be in that fight. We want to see them there. We want to see them all together. So with all that being said, Lee, how would you sum up Mercedes' day? Do you feel that the performance warranted the result and the fortune that they got, or do you feel that it was just one of those days where they were almost humbled by how big that deficit actually is?
Well, I think it was a mix of all of that. You look back at practice on Friday, and you saw Lewis is 1.5 seconds behind Max. Where have Mercedes gone wrong that Mercedes built a car that's 1.5 seconds slower than a Red Bull? I know practice times aren't completely representative, but if you're a Lewis fan or a Mercedes fan, that was a really horrible feeling to see those results on the practice sessions on Friday. But Mercedes being the team, the caliber of the team they are, they obviously chipped away at the weaknesses, and they found time setting the car. And I'm sure there's still more time in that car. But if you said to them on Friday, yeah, you're going to get a podium, a P4, they're, yes, brilliant, because we don't deserve that. And all right, Lewis and George drove brilliantly, but they probably didn't deserve the position on pure merit. They got that because of the Red Bulls not finishing the race. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter in the actual standings and the points, because that's what counts at the end. So they're obviously over the moon because they did not expect to get that.
Well, I've seen them celebrate 1-2s with less enthusiasm than the way they celebrate the 3-4 today. I mean, no disrespect, it shouldn't be snuffed at, but this is the team that's so used to success. So it was actually quite refreshing to see how happy they were that they obviously overachieved on what they expected themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's whatever's wrong with their car, they obviously didn't design it to be slow, and what they designed it to be as fast as obviously they're rumored to ice a second a lap quicker because of their minimal or zero side pods, whichever you want to call it, and the other effects which is potentially being caused by the porpoising or any other aero issues is taking a lot of the speed out of that car, which they obviously need to work on. But that, as Courtney says, I'm sure they'll be in the championship battle this year, but it's just a matter of how long it takes to get that. And if it takes too long, they'll just be annoying to the championship fight later in the season if they don't get in the championship fight. But Mercedes will win a race this season. I'm sure that will at least happen.
Well, yeah, you can always count on them to do that much. I mean, especially Lewis, because I think he's won a Grand Prix in every season of his career in F1. So this could potentially be the biggest threat to that record, but he'll certainly be giving it his all to try and deliver on that once again. I wanted to ask you both about what you thought about George Russell's second Mercedes debut, if you like. Qualifying, it wasn't very impressive. He was P9. It's definitely off pace from where they expected him to be, but he recovered that very, very early on the start. There was a bit of chaos with K-Mag getting involved with Sergio Perez and Lewis Hamilton, and Valtteri Bottas having a terrible start as well, but he took his chances and managed to get up to P6 behind Lewis. And throughout the race, even though he wasn't quite on the level of Lewis throughout that race, he was pretty much there or thereabouts. So what did you make of George Russell's day? Is it a good day for George?
I'd say solid. He wasn't in a position to show star quality. I mean, his teammate is Lewis Hamilton, for goodness sake. And you know what? Yeah, he wasn't challenging him, but he was a solid back marker not back marker. It was a solid member for the team in his debut race. And I think actually the way that he drove for Mercedes today in his debut, well, as you said, his second debut, shows that he's been in the Mercedes family for some time now. He didn't have any real struggles with the setup. He didn't like he was struggling in the car. He took that car to the exact level where it is right now. And for the first race in a big team like that, solid job by George. If Mercedes develop that car the way we expect it to, he will play a part in this championship battle. So, good start for George, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to move on to some of the other standout stories in this one, as much as I'd love to talk about George Russell's second Mercedes debut. Haas, I think we've got to praise huge kudos to the Haas team. I mean, there were fears after the first test that, this was such a big year for Haas. They invested so much time, money, and resource, not to mention all of the stuff going on with their former sponsors and former driver over to what was happening in Ukraine. It's been such a difficult 14 months for the team. But they've come back, they've produced a very, very good car, and it seems like they've got a very solid Ferrari power unit in that car as well. Not to mention the fact that Kevin Magnussen, after 14 months out of a Formula 1 car, comes back in with little more than a few days of running under his belt, and he only goes and solidifies a great qualifying performance with a P5 finish. I mean, I'll tell you what, we have seen some fairy tale stories in Formula 1, most notably the one of Haas's debut where Romain Grosjean, I think it was, that finished in P6 in Australia back in 2016. What an incredible performance from Haas. I mean, how impressed. Obviously I was enjoying what Ferrari were doing, but I had a very, very soft spot for the Haas team and everyone involved. How impressed were you by their performance today, and by in particular Kevin Magnussen?
Return of the Kevin.
Yeah, return of the Kevin.
Said that perfectly there. But yeah, Lee, care to elaborate on the return of K-Mag?
Get there first, Courtney.
Right.
It was. I mean, you had Nico as a super sub, and he has that road comeback, and we'll get to that later. But it takes a particular caliber of driver to be away from the sport and come back and then deliver performance and not lose any sharpness or driving ability or even for reactions. Obviously, he was in other series last year, so he didn't completely stop racing. And the only thing that may have helped Kevin is everybody was in the same boat. It was just a new car, new rules completely, so everyone has to learn. So that's the only thing that may have helped Kevin in that situation, but it's so glad to see him back. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy his radio messages. He's one of the few drivers that will tell the drivers to suck certain appendages. I'm not going to name that because I'm going to be polite, but so it's nice to have him back, and even Mick obviously they took a gamble not changing his tyres, but it'd be nice for Mick to get his first points. I'm sure he will get his first points. That Haas has got a nice bit of speed behind it, and obviously Gunther Steiner smiling out there. I mean, last time I think he smiled that much was when they got that P6 in Australia with Romain Grosjean. That guy just doesn't smile because the team has just not had a lot of luck. So it was nice to see that.
Yeah, I can't think of a person I'm more happy for than Gunther Steiner. I think he's been in such a tumultuous position as the Haas team principal. He's had so many problems, trying to find sponsors, trying to find funding over and over again, not just this season, but over again throughout his time there, having to deal with, as he put it, a very small group of people compared to the plethora of resources that some of the bigger teams have. And they've done a fantastic job. It must be said, they've put so much effort, time and money and resource into it. Yes, of course, they've benefited from having that partnership with Ferrari where they've had to benefit from a lot of people that have been seconded over by Ferrari because of the cost cap environment that we find ourselves in now. But you know what? That's Formula 1. People change teams all the time. And we didn't even get into the fact that Mercedes might be worried about the people going over to the Red Bull powertrains unit that might have had an impact on their engine going forward. But that's how Formula 1 works. And Haas have done a great job with that, and it was so great to watch Gunther after the race, how happy he was, some of the stuff he was saying about Kevin Magnussen, and of course Mick Schumacher, we should mention, who, despite not getting points, and he will be a little bit disappointed, was in P11, And that's a career best finish for Mick, although he did look like he was struggling a bit compared to K-Mag throughout the weekend. But I'm sure Mick will have stronger weekends going forward. I think it was, I think Gunther was saying that because Magnussen had been away for 14 months, he said, you know, if we could have got him in sooner, he might have been on the podium. He was that good. But yeah, Courtney, how great is it to see, you know, the smile return back to Gunther Steiner, and any expletives or swear words he might have to chuck in are happy ones rather than moaning at K-Mag for wrecking his door.
Yeah, it's definitely a great moment for Haas. They've gone from, let's be honest, a couple of seasons ago, Haas was seen as nothing more as the meme team. Okay, they were just seen as a meme and all the Drive to Survive jokes. To last season being the slowest and I'd say most unpopular team on the grid, given circumstances that you briefly covered. You started talking about Haas, to now having something genuine to celebrate. If this continues the way it does, I'm sure they're going to have many more moments to come. It's not only a great moment for Haas as a team and Kevin Magnussen, but if Haas keep this up, this could be an opportunity for Mick Schumacher to finally make a name for himself in Formula One. So if Haas carry on the way they are, there's a lot of feel-good stories that could come from this.
Absolutely. And we should also mention another team that's got a lot of feel-good stories coming from it right now is Alfa Romeo. I mean, who'd have thought that the two best cars in the midfield from the first race would be Haas and Alfa Romeo?
Not Courtney.
Definitely not Courtney. Yeah, Courtney's favourite team, by the way, for those of you who don't know.
They did a thing. Alfa Romeo did a thing.
A double points finish. I can't remember the last time they did that. But yeah, Valtteri Bottas, a new lease of life, a new team, new security, new environment, and he seems to be thriving. P6, and it was a solid qualifying performance as well for Valtteri Bottas. He had a bad start. He did drop all the way down to 14th, and I think a lot of us, myself included, thought, oh, here we go. The old Bottas tendencies to sort of underperform a little bit. With all due respect, seemed to have resurfaced in his new team, but he got his head down. He recovered very, very well. Took advantage of some fortune, of course, and it was a very solid P6, and he was delighted with that. So I'm really happy for Valtteri Bottas, and I think we don't really need to go in too much about that particular performance because it's stuff that we know about Bottas, stuff we probably saw from Bottas in his Williams days, what got him on board at Mercedes. But I want to talk about Guan Yu Zhou, or Zhou Guan Yu, I suppose we should say more appropriately. First Chinese driver in Formula One, first Chinese driver to score points on his debut as well. So how impressed were you by Zhou Guan Yu? He seemed to have a very solid race as well in that Alfa Romeo.
Very, very happy for him. He will have come in with a lot of doubters. I'm not going to lie, I'm one of them. But he's come in, done a solid job for the team. And I think it'd be a great deal for China as well. It's no secret that, you know, one of the main reasons why he got a seat in Formula One in the first place is because of the Chinese, obviously the Chinese audience that would come with him arriving. So that would have been a massive, massive, massive deal for the Chinese fans. So yet again, another good news story. And these kind of stories that are developed today are exactly what we, the fans, wanted to come from these regulation changes. So long may it last. And I'll tell you what, it makes our podcast a hell of a lot easier to do.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think the hardest part for us is trying to condense it all into a suitable time frame for you guys so you don't get bored with like 2 hours worth of content, and we're certainly trying not to do that. So I hope we're doing okay on that one. Another team that got a double points finish today, Alpine, 7th and 9th, Ocon 7th, Alonso in 9th. Very strange day for them, because I think they would have had aspirations to try and be that team that tries to break into that lead group, not necessarily on Ferrari's level, but to try and challenge the likes of Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren possibly on occasion as well. But as far as Alpine go, yeah, very quiet day for them, but a solid P7 and P9 for Alpine. Lee, what did you make of Alpine's day? Do you think they'll be happy with that, or do you think that they'll be more concerned about the fact that they were beaten by Haas and Alfa Romeo?
I got to admit, I think they'll be happy with that for the first race. Where they were through testing, Alpine looked like they were nowhere, but they've obviously put their thinking caps on, which I'm sure they already had on, but they've figured out what the issue with their car is and they've sorted themselves out. And actually, there is some speed in that car. Obviously, Alonso was saying that from testing, that there was he liked the car, their speed in the car, but we finally got to see the speed in the car, and it shows you how close a pairing and performance-wise that they are. For most of the Grand Prix, they were racing each other for the entirety of their race. It was only at the end, towards the end, that they obviously got separated, but they were constantly on the same piece of track. And I mean, I've forgotten his name. Sorry, what's the team principal? I've completely forgotten his name.
Otmar Safnir.
That's it. Thank you very much. He must have been hating his first race there, Alpine. It's like you keep overtaking your teammate on the track in your first race, and when you're the team principal the first time on the job, it must have been horrible for him. Like, please don't crash into each other. Please
seeing Ocon in a pink car battling his teammates, it's got the old Force India vibes in there. It's a good thing Fernando seemed to. Fernando didn't seem to be in the most feistiest mood today on the track. He seemed to be quite calm, and when Ocon was fighting him, Alonso seemed quite happy to acknowledge that Ocon was faster than him today. I mean, was it Ocon that tagged Mick Schumacher at the start of the race?
Yes.
I think we should mention that Schumacher's race was affected a little bit by that, or that, an Ocon got a 5-second penalty. But, you're right. It was a day where most of the time, the two Pink Panthers, if we like, pretty much were going around the track rather nicely together until the end, where Ocon seemed to have a bit more than Fernando. So I think they'll be relatively happy. I mean, it could have gone one way or the other with Alpine, but I think they are, relatively speaking, in a very good position. And consistency is the name of the game, and that's ultimately what got on P5 in the Constructors last year. So they probably are trying to remember that going forward this season. Alpha Tauri, it could have been a better day for them. Pierre Gasly was running a very solid race before he had his problems that brought out the safety car. He was running in a solid P8, I believe, before that all went out. And of course, Yuki Tsunoda was able to benefit from that and finish P8 anyway. So, we don't really need to say too much on Gasly. We don't already know. He went about his business and done well, but he'll be gutted to miss out on points. But it's nice to see Yuki Tsunoda looking a bit more on form and a bit more representative, because this is a huge year for Yuki Tsunoda, and it's good to see that he got some solid points for the team.
Yeah, as I said, Adam, amen to that, mate, because he's probably one of the most under pressure drivers in terms of holding on to his seat this season. So what a solid start for Yuki. He's had to deal with a lot of criticism. Some of it is merited. So he's taken himself away. With these changes in regulations, maybe a lot of the drivers see it as a fresh start for them, and maybe Yuki Tsunoda is taking full advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully for his sake that continues, because this is a big year for him, and I think you've just got to make it count. I think I was watching the F2 race, and I saw an incredible performance from Ayumu Iwasa in the F2 race today. Absolutely phenomenal. I definitely recommend you check that out. It's from the back of the grid all the way to the front. It was really, really special stuff. So he's a Red Bull driver, as is Yuri Vips, another Red Bull driver. Well, I'm not sure if Yuri Vips is still part of the Red Bull Academy, but there's a lot of good Red Bull drivers in that academy coming through. Dennis Hauger being another one, the Formula 3 champion this season in F2. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Yuki Tsunoda to have to deliver and perform to a level where Red Bull feels satisfied that he's worthy of being in that car. Not to mention Alex Albon in the Williams, who looked rather solid, although the result didn't necessarily reflect the performance for Alex Albon, although he did get in P13, so I think we should say he did rather well. I think that's all fair to say on the Williams front. I think that, the result, even though they were struggling. I think one team we should turn our attention to that we haven't mentioned already is McLaren. Arguably, with all due respect to them, the biggest disappointment by far. Yeah. And it must be really, really hard for McLaren. And I sincerely hope that this is one of those races where McLaren just struggled for so many different reasons, and they'll understand why and be able to put it right for future races. I really, really hope, because throughout testing, it's fair to say that McLaren looked relatively good. If anything, they looked like they were in that fight, not necessarily with the likes of Red Bull and Ferrari, but they were pretty much in a position where we thought maybe they'll challenge Mercedes. Maybe they'll be able to be in a position where they've got a solid foundation and they can come forward. They've got two very capable drivers. And for whatever reason, they were just nowhere today. Not even Lando Norris, as brilliant as Lando has been last season, being able to pull results out of thin air. He wasn't able to do anything. And the trend I was noticing, not just with McLaren, but also the Aston Martins, the Williamses as well. I think there was one point in that race where the bottom six were all Mercedes-powered cars. And of the finished runners, that was the case as well. But on the subject of McLaren, guys, how worried are we? Could this become a trend where McLaren have dropped back so far that we're back in the days like they were in 2015 when they first got the Honda power units, and how we remember how bad that, or 2017, we remember how bad those days were for McLaren. What are your thoughts on this one, Lee?
I don't think it's that bad. I think some obviously they got probably different issues to Mercedes, but I reckon there is some inherent pace in that car. They're just limited by the issues they're currently experiencing. I know one of the things they're talking about is obviously the overheating of brakes, being that they had no issue whatsoever with their brakes in Barcelona. They've arrived in the Middle East, in Bahrain, where it's a lot hotter than Spain at this time of year, and brakes just get cooked. So they've definitely got some heating issue or overheating issues in that car, which is obviously limiting them. That is going to be probably circuit specific. Obviously, next week's not very far, so they're probably going to have the same issue until they can sort out their overheating. But they're probably going to have other issues other than the overheating. But I reckon they will take time to unlock the performance in that car, and I reckon they'll be up there. It's just a matter of, like Mercedes, how long until they can unlock the performance that is in that car somewhere.
Yeah, it definitely seemed that way. We saw photos afterwards of Daniel Ricciardo. Again, he was recovering from COVID, so obviously I don't imagine he was probably 100%.
Yeah.
Lando obviously wasn't feeling absolutely comfortable with the car. He spent more time battling the Williamses and the Aston Martins than he did anyone else, which is probably not what he would have envisioned this season, or would have wanted, of course. But as I said already, and I agree with you, Lee, I think they've been plagued by a few issues, mostly by the brakes, which they still don't look like they've been able to get on top of. So hopefully this is just a one-off, and we'll see them at a more representative pace in future races. I certainly hope so, because we need McLaren at the front. They were meant to make that jump up with Ferrari. Maybe not as huge a leap, but a leap nonetheless towards that front pack. On the subject of engines, and I have to mention this, as I said already, Mercedes, the bottom 6 runners were Mercedes-powered teams. Given how significant reliability is in this new era for engines for the next few years, Courtney, do you think it's possible that perhaps Mercedes, as an engine provider, have perhaps addressed the reliability issue, which plagued them a lot last season? I think there was how many times did Mercedes, the team, actually request a new engine? It was like 4 or 5 times. On Bottas, and I think once on Lewis as well, requested an extra engine component. Is there a fear that perhaps Mercedes have pushed too far on reliability, and that the likes of Ferrari, Red Bull powertrain / Honda, and maybe even Alpine to a degree, have got to a position where they may find themselves competitive, and maybe more so, against the Mercedes powered teams?
It's a possibility. I don't think we're going to get a real indication until we go to a variety of tracks. Obviously, a lot of the cooling systems that these teams are all using could come into it. Cooling is clearly a big issue. The problem is that with the engine freeze, it could be a massive issue moving forward. But with the development of these cars at the rate that we're going to see, I do feel we're going to see a lot of sort of upwards and downward peaks when it comes to performance. I wouldn't be surprised if we go to Jeddah next week and we'll see the one team did really well in Bahrain struggle at Jeddah. These teams are getting around these new regulations. As I said before, they've done really well to start with, generally speaking. But you are going to have teams that are going to start off really slow, just whilst they figure out, because I think nothing worth noting is that actually the amount of testing these cars have done is probably the least days they've done in years. We only had 2 3-day testing sessions, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or was it 4?
No, it was 3 days, yeah.
So they had 6 days worth of testing, when I remember seasons when they had at least 12. So these teams are still effectively, this Grand Prix was for some teams an extension of testing. So I do feel we're going to be seeing a lot of changes when it comes to the pecking order throughout this season, because even if the teams don't want to be where they want to be this season, they know they're setting up the concepts of their cars for the next 4 or 5 years. So I do feel I think we're going to see a lot of high highs and low lows for some of these teams.
Yeah, and very well put. I think that's a really, really good point. There are going to be days where some teams will do brilliantly on a day like today and terribly. I certainly hope one of those isn't Ferrari. I hope they're consistent all the way through the year. But there will be other days where teams don't necessarily perform well today, and you never know. We might find that midfield completely reversed. We might see Haas and Alfa Romeo in more familiar territory that we've been used to seeing them, and then days where McLaren are challenging the top teams, and we certainly hope McLaren are going to be back up there as well. But it's a nice spread throughout the field. I must be said that everyone did. I can't remember seeing a bad car out there. You know, it's very easy to pick and choose and say at the back of the field they look terrible, but relatively speaking, everyone was still there or thereabouts. I want to talk briefly as well before we round this off about Nico Hulkenberg. He stepped in. Return of the Hulk, again, stepped in for Sebastian Vettel, who had COVID, and hopefully Seb recovers soon. We might see him in Jeddah. We might not. We'll have to wait and see. It looked like it affected Daniel Ricciardo, so maybe they'll give Seb a little bit of extra time. We'll have to wait and see. But Nico Hulkenberg stepped in, and for most of the weekend, it did take him a little bit of time to get used to this new car, because I think it was the first time he'd driven this new car. He had no running at all. So K-Mag had some running. Hulkenberg just had sim data to go on, which is, compared to the real-world environment, certainly not a fair reflection on how the car is going to perform. So, with all that being said, for the most part, Hulkenberg was actually pretty much on par with Stroll, and at most of the time in the race, up until the end, he was ahead of him. So, how would you sum up Hulkenberg's day? Would you say he had a good day, and perhaps there might be a few more teams having a look around thinking maybe there's some life in the old dog yet?
I would have said it just proves that Lance shouldn't be in Formula One. I'm not a fan of Lance Stroll.
I was about to apologise to Hulk there for calling him an old dog, but you want to get rid of Stroll. Wow. I'm not sure you're going to convince his dad of that one, Lee.
Yeah, he's not going to go anywhere because obviously Lawrence bringing in the money. But yeah, I just think it proves the point that Lance shouldn't. It just doesn't deserve the seat there, but that's just my opinion. But it's nice to see Nico back. It's just a shame. I don't think he's going to get a chance of another secured seat. Obviously, there's the talk of Fittipaldi. It is Fittipaldi, isn't it? It's about he wants to bring in a new team, or is it not Fittipaldi?
Close,
Andretti, yeah.
Andretti, I knew it was an American.
Same era.
Yeah.
Our American followers have simultaneously just moved over to another podcast because of that. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
you besmirched their beloved hero. Damn it.
Sorry, but if that team does come and obviously does actually occur, then we have a space for an extra 2 drivers. Then we may see Nico return. But apart from being a super sub, I don't think Nico is going to have the opportunity to return again. As much as I love the guy and enjoy seeing him in the sport.
Yeah, I certainly feel for his partner because she was probably planning a nice picnic this weekend a few days ago. You know, Nico loves his pastry, as we've seen a few times in a nice cafe having a croissant or two. And then he gets the phone call to go all the way to Bahrain, literally at the last minute just to jump in the Aston Martin. And of course, we'd all take the chance to do that if we had it. But yeah, I think he did rather well this weekend. Yeah. Before we round off this episode, I thought I'd just throw in, or ask you guys, I think it's a better way of putting it, your thoughts on the season ahead. We've seen the first race now. The racing looks very, very competitive. Is there anything particular that you'd like to see going forward, or are the hallmarks in shape now for an exciting season ahead?
All I want to see from the season is a continuation of today. That is what we want to be seeing. Obviously, you want to be seeing Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton, Leclerc, Verstappen dicing for a championship. But let's not forget about Carlos Sainz and George Russell. If all these guys and teams get their act together, we could be in for a very special season.
So you heard it here first, folks. Courtney wants to see a Ferrari 1-2 every race this season. I am definitely on board with that one. And Lee, what about you?
Well, I'm not sure I would replicate Courtney's sentiment of the same result every race.
I am going to twist this in my favour as quite, no matter how you put it, Lee. So choose your words carefully, my friend.
But overall, it was an enjoyable race to watch. Not because obviously the result that you're over the moon with, but because all the teams up and down the grid were fighting, there wasn't segregation out. Obviously, they would take that back. The Mercedes powered cars dropped away from the rest of the field, so that bit was segregated out. But they were still fighting with each other. The teams were close all the time. There was the strategy. Obviously, we got a lot of pit stops, which was nice to see compared to one stops. And so you had a lot more variation, and it was just an enjoyable to and throwing. You couldn't predict the result, which is the last thing. Is it's boring. Really, this is going to be obvious. So it was just an exciting, entertaining race throughout. And I think that's more what Courtney meant. It was a nice, exciting, entertaining race in a Ferrari 1-2.
It's not quite
words, Adam.
It's not quite how I heard it.
But it's good. It's potential for a great season, as even if it's just Ferrari and Red Bull fighting out. But if Mercedes get their act together, McLaren, I don't know. It's so much potential in the season, the new regulations. It's just exciting to think about.
Exactly. I'd just like to say one more thing, actually. I don't know about you guys. As much as I love Formula One, over the past, I'd say at least decade, there have been sort of like parts of a race where I almost gloss over because there isn't anything happening.
Yeah.
There was action going on all the way through that race today. And again, if that's a blueprint for the rest of the season, I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think F1 and the FIA have done a great job. We haven't even actually talked about the report from Abu Dhabi. I forgot all about that. Should we do that quickly before we sign off?
Yeah.
Let's do that quickly. Okay, so I'm just going to get on my phone because I did lift out a few little points. So from the key points of the Abu Dhabi report, now for those of you that weren't sure what we're talking about here, this is the report that the FIA promised that they were going to release at some point around about this time, based on what their investigation or finding was over what happened at the controversial finale in Abu Dhabi, where Michael Massey, the former race director, put out the safety car 5 laps from the end and controversially asked specific lap cars to overtake the safety car, which allowed Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton to have a 1-lap shootout, albeit in circumstances which were massively in favour of Max Verstappen, which led him to winning the World Championship in controversial circumstances. Now, the report has been published, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't read the whole thing front to back. I've only skim-read certain parts, and this is what I've pulled from it from what I found. What I found is that the FIA seemed to be under the opinion that that it seems that the way everything went down, it was mostly down to human error. So it seems that whilst Michael Massey acted in good faith in the regulations, there was a lot of pressure being put on his shoulders owing to the constant barrage of radio messages from both Red Bull and Mercedes and probably other teams as well, which obviously wasn't going to help his thinking, which led him to make an error in how he handled the ruling over what was going on with the safety car. Now, of course, there's a few ways in which you can interpret that, but ultimately they just said, look, he made a mistake. From that analysis, they've obviously made some rule changes, particularly the one where they, I think they mentioned they changed the rule. I think it was article, was it 48.13? Where they changed
we'll run with that. We'll run with that.
Yeah, I'm that's what I'm trying to remember off of memory. I've done really well up to this point, so I'm trying not to ruin it now. They've changed the any versus all, to which I didn't think really needed to be changed. I think it just kind of implied that they knew that they, interpreted the rules incorrectly when they made the ruling. But they've made those changes, and they've basically said, look, it's human error. They made a mistake. It was all in good faith. It wasn't helpful. They've removed the communication from the teams to the race director. They've changed the rules so that they're written more concisely and clearly so that they aren't going to make that mistake in future. And they've basically said that the result is valid, final, and cannot be overturned or changed. So with all of that in mind, guys, are you satisfied with the report, or is it just one of those that this is kind of what we expected and now we just got to kind of get on with it now because that's what the FIA are expecting us to do?
I mean, it's nice that they put the effort in. What the majority of the F1 fan base want to see is the FIA making sure that something like that never happens again. It's not the fact that we saw a driver robbed of a world championship. We're seeing, some championships. Look at 2008, for example. That was heartbreaking for Felipe Massa. It works both ways. But it's just a fact that he felt like that result was manufactured, and that just left a rotten feeling for a lot of us. And they really need to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And Lewis himself, he did say that, it was quite rare to get an apology from the FIA, whether it was an actual apology they gave him or it was in this written report. I'm not sure. It didn't seem like they apologised for it. They just seemed to own up for what happened, and hopefully that's enough to move on. Lee, are you satisfied from what we've learned from this report, or what I've been able to pick out from it, in terms of how the FIA have seen this incident in Abu Dhabi and being able to move on from it?
I would have said it's more a tick blocking exercise than an actual helpful report, because obviously they, from the bits I've seen, they don't actually name Michael Massey. They just said there was human error. They don't. Obviously, you can make a logical guess that it was Michael Massey is the person they're pointing the finger at, but it doesn't imply Michael Massey at all.
Well, the fact that they removed him from that role.
Oh yeah, but in the official report, they don't actually.
Yeah, no, they don't. They don't. I should stress
human error.
Yeah, I should stress that they didn't actually. Yeah, but they did say that the race director acted in good faith. So it's kind of, they are suggesting that.
But it's what I'm saying. It's like the way I say it is, we know there was something wrong. Or something wrong happened. I'm not saying to overturn the result, but we're not going to do too much about it. It's just something wrong happened. And that's how it feels to me. Obviously, I know he's moved on to other parts of the FIA and have brought in restriction. The only concern also, the fix from it, is I still don't fully understand the VAR race director thing that's going on, with the extra team to, where they're doing the video. I don't fully understand what that is for. I still don't understand it. And the thing that I'm afraid of is if a circumstance occurs that, this is now, so we're going to now view this to the race director. We're going to have to not obviously pause the race because that's not going to happen, but we now have to delegate and come back and have a committee. So we're going to decide this result in 24 hours. And then fans are waiting for a result for something because we now have to have extra race directors that are sitting remotely to assist the race director. What is the purpose? It doesn't make any sense what this is for, because you already have the stewards of video reviewing of the race itself. So I don't fully understand that purpose, and it's not fully explained in the document what it is for. It's just a suggestion to help with the race director.
Well, I remember hearing one earlier actually on this, because and I totally get that. It doesn't make sense, because I think it was the new race director, I can't remember who it was, mentioned that they would let, it was to do with gaining an unfair advantage. I think they mentioned that they would let teams and drivers decide after something like that has happened whether they think they need to give places back or not. And, that seemed really strange, because I thought, well, if the stewards are going to determine whether or not they should have done after the race, and if in the case that they didn't, they're kind of, I don't know, lending all of that responsibility over to teams and drivers. And let's be honest, if you're an F1 driver, most of them are going to make a very close move to kind of keep a position, which is, beyond track limits or whatever you want to call it, and gain an unfair advantage. They're going to keep the place. And then be especially if you're in, if you're in a much more competitive car or faster car, and you think, oh, well, the worst you can do is give me a 5-second penalty, and you just drive down the road and beat that person by 20 seconds. It's like, well, it's not really fair, is it? That's kind of they're not doing anything. They're just passing the buck, or I wasn't convinced when I heard that before the race. I was actually quite dumbfounded by it. I was like, are we actually going to get officials today or not? I mean, although I will say they seem to police track limits rather well. I didn't see one person abusing track limits too much. I know Lewis was mentioned that he did it a couple of times, but he didn't do it enough to warrant a penalty. So, fair play on them. They were quite consistent on that part. Anyway, look, we've rambled on enough about all this. It's been a great, great day for Formula One for a lot of reasons. Plenty of stories to take from this one. Most notably, it does seem, not getting ahead of myself, but it does seem that Ferrari are well and truly back. Hopefully they can sustain that. Red Bull certainly with a lot of head scratching to do after a difficult day for them. And of course, plenty of lessons to learn from Mercedes, but they'll certainly be enjoying that champagne that Lewis Hamilton brought home for them whilst they try and mull over how they're going to get back to the top. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.